Welcome to the sixth episode of the Global Communications Podcast, where we explore the power of communications to transform. My name is Sandra Coyle, your host of this podcast and the founder of Coyle Communications. Joining us today is Eleanor Tan, who serves as the Global Head of Corporate Communications at the China Navigation Company in Singapore. Eleanor has had a front row seat in internal and change communications, having acquired significant experience and expertise in the largest restructuring exercise undertaken by a global publisher in its 210-year-old history. Yes, 210 years, impacting 20% of its workforce. In that role, she led communications for 14 offices in the Asia Pacific region. Today, Eleanor and I will explore the power of communications as a tool for transformation within organizations. Thank you so much, Eleanor, for joining us today. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So we like to start the podcast off with some geography. You're based in Singapore. Could you tell the audience a bit about Singapore, living and working there?
It's hot. Yes, we are located in the tropics on the equator. It's a place where I was born and I live here. And it's an island state, so there's no capital of Singapore. But we're a modern society. Recently, we were voted as a smart city. We use a lot of technology here in Singapore. And it's a fairly young country as compared to the US, of course. So, all in all, it's a fun place to be in right now. In Singapore, there's a huge young population. Of course, we have the older people like me. We have a lot of nationalities in Singapore, and a lot of multinational corporations base their headquarters or regional headquarters in Singapore. At the China Navigation Company, well, we call ourselves CNCO for short. Our global headquarters is in Singapore, actually. So I serve as the global head of our corporate communications here. Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier when we were briefing that Cathay Pacific is part of your company. Am I correct? That's
yeah. It's owned by the Swire Group. So CNCO itself, we are the deep sea shipping arm of the Swire Group. So the Swire Group itself owns Cathay Pacific, Swire Pacific Offshore, and a whole range of businesses across diverse industries. So it'll be really very challenging for me to go through everything, but it is a very well-established conglomerate with different business interests. So I am with the shipping arm, yeah. And we are the oldest operating entity, and we are turning 150 years old.
So you went from 210 years to 150 years, and you told me a funny story.
Yeah. I have this thing about older things. It's very interesting because I didn't intend to do communications for older companies per se, but I've really had the privilege of working with heritage brands. My very first one was with the British Council. That's the UK's International Cultural Relations Agency. So, when I joined them, one of the big projects I did was the 70th anniversary of the British Council worldwide. And it was really fun because, you could leverage on memories and the emotional ties that people have with the British Council. And then after that, I went on to join Wiley at 210 years old, and now, with the China Navigation Company, is 150 years old. So I really count it as such a privilege to be able to do communications with such cherished brands, I would say. They're employees who truly love the company. I mean, they're stakeholders, they're customers, they're students, for example, at British Council that really love the organization. I mean, a bit of background, even for myself as a teenager, I studied English at the British Council. So it was a very nice look back to work for the British Council when I joined them. So I was also their first head of communications for the organization in Singapore. So, it all tied in really nicely. So, it's been such a joy working with such organizations, actually.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And I think there's a lesson there for young communications professionals. I know in my Washington, D.C. days, people would say, oh, you like old brands. They're 40 years old. But I love the way you positioned it. It's really heritage brands. And I guess the advice is be open because you never know which brands will give you
Exactly.
the best opportunity. And old is good.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think there's a lot of emotional, what do you call that, connections to the brand. And I think, there's a thing about brands, right? That, it really tugs at the heartstring and, you will defend a brand and, you see the good that the brand has done over the years. For example, like what I've seen at British Council, I've seen at Wiley, and now even at Cienco. So, there are just people who advocate for your brand, right? Because we talk a lot about having brand advocates, so you have these among different target audiences as well. So it's wonderful to actually hear stories of how people have interacted with your brand, how they defend your brand, and how you use that. You don't take it for granted, obviously. And as a communications person, it's also how do you build up that trust, continue to build up that trust in your brand as well. So that's why I think communications for heritage brands is a very interesting book, actually. Yeah.
And the good companies last a long time, right? So there's a lot of
So
impact stories there.
yeah, there is.
So
Yeah.
let's talk a bit about change communication because you've had
Mm,
quite a bit of experience there. Can you
mm.
tell us what it is for our audience and why it's necessary for companies and organizations?
I think, change is happening everywhere in every organization. And it is really hard to find an organization that isn't undergoing any form of change, actually. I think change communications is actually helping to communicate change, obviously, and why it's important for the company to move forward to achieving its goals in the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever, and to really align employee behavior to achieving these common goals, actually. So I mean, that in a nutshell is what I think change communications is, and what I've been doing actually since I joined Wiley 200 in 2010, and throughout then, even in my current place as well. So I think it's really through communications we want to really inspire uh, employees, in terms of internal communications, and really to have that joined up vision, that alignment, that we all move to the same drumbeat and achieve the same goals, actually. Yeah.
In your experience so far, what are the critical ingredients of a successful change communication program from both a leadership perspective and also from an employee perspective? What do you see as the key elements that need to happen?
I think everyone needs to be engaged in the process. It can't be something that leadership says, "Oh, this is what we're going to do," and impose it. I think also because society itself has changed. So I think it needs to be both a bottom up as well as a top down. I mean, a top down will be providing that leadership, but I think for the wider audience, in this case, I'm talking about employees, they need to understand what it is, to be able to give their input, to really tell the leadership openly and transparently whether something will work, whether this will not achieve the desired results. And I think it needs to be an element of continuous feedback and that determination to succeed. I think these are very important. I mean, from what I've seen over the many years that I've done change communications, actually. I think also at the same time, in the spirit of openness and transparency, that also to recognize if something is not working, kill it, or maybe not in those terms, maybe trash it. Yeah, but I think it's also about courage in leadership to recognize what is not working, and for something that's working well, how can you make it better? I think on the whole, in the organizations that I've worked for, we talk a lot about being a high performance organization. And I think that's where communications can really play that part to communicating what high performance is, and how can everyone in the organization work towards that. I think that's been important for us. Yeah.
And that's interesting because I see a lot with change communications, and there's an organization that Eleanor and I had the opportunity to work together at about 15 years ago or so that was going through a lot of change. You find that employees will talk to each other but
Yeah.
seldom want to share that with leadership itself. So I love your
Mm.
point about courageous leadership. I think, what do you think about courageous employees too, that, better to speak up and air
Mm.
common concerns,
Mm.
as
Mm.
opposed to the whisper campaigns that happen as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I think from what I've seen, right, I think, you only need a few courageous employees to start the ball rolling. And when they realize that, hey, actually I can give feedback, leadership is really open, it actually emboldens other people to do that. So I feel that once you get it started and leadership continues to say, give us feedback, we're looking into it, we will respond to it. If we don't have an answer now, we will commit to getting the answer. I think that is very useful, and it will encourage colleagues to speak up, actually. I mean, that's what I've found in my own organization. I mean, so much so that at my current place, we started using like real-time Q&A systems, voting systems through our town hall meetings. So, once colleagues got a taste of it and said, hey, we realized that we can ask leadership these questions and leadership doesn't shy away, it encourages people to do that. And I think, overall, we become a better organization, and, people know that they will never be penalized for asking questions, or, when leadership doesn't have that answer at that point in time, they have the assurance that leadership will find the answers for them, actually. Yeah.
That's excellent. And I just want to dig a bit more into communication. So this might be
Mm,
targeting those who would like to come into the field itself. Change usually falls within what we call internal communications, but within
mm,
companies, there's often, or within this career sector, there's often two types of communication specialists. They are internal or
mm.
external. They kind of lean one way or another. Of course, in
Yeah,
your role, you probably have to combine. I've had to
yeah,
combine
I do
in my
both. Yeah.
past, but there's
Mm.
a talent or a desire to be in one place or the other. But I think for those who are outside this field and work in organizations, it probably confuses them a bit. Could you
Yeah.
discuss the similarities and differences between the two?
Well, I think, in my role, as you have said, I actually do both. And, I think also because of how society has evolved, and also because of the use of social media now, I think the lines actually between internal and external are blurring as well. So the thing is, quite a lot of my friends in the industry have also said that, we should be aware that nothing is really internal, because, it can get external as well. So, and personally, I think that internal comms is very powerful, because you can create brand advocates out of your employees. For example, for any one of us who wants to go and work at our organization, who actually go to Glassdoor, for example, right, to find out what employees say. So, a highly engaged employee would really be the best you. So, it is my role as an internal communications person to really identify stories, issues, talking points, to really enable my colleagues to do that. So, I look at internal communications as, what do you call that? A force, maybe, to really inform, connect, and engage colleagues, so that everyone knows what's happening in the organization. We can share stories of success, learning points, and my aim is always to make the organization even better, right? So I think through that we use a variety of tools that I'm sure a lot of other people use as well. Your social media, your intranet, your internal podcasts, and stuff like this. So I think for me, it's like when a colleague comes to me with a story idea, I would say, okay, can this be used externally as well? So there are some parts that, of course, you have to tweak it a little bit here and there. But, as much as possible, we try to run the story internally and externally as well. For example, we use LinkedIn a lot. So, some of the stories are actually internal, but they've been externalized, right? There's some information for sure that we can't put it up because of commercial reasons. But, my role is really to see, oh, this is actually a good story that we can run externally as well. So I've had quite a good rate of success with that, actually. And you'll realize that, colleagues are eager to tell their stories, and, it's really working with them to do it. I think they always think that they need perfect English to write for Eleanor and her team, but it's not true. We'll actually help to wordsmith that. So, I tell colleagues sometimes it may not be a full story, it can be a visual, it can be a short video because everyone has a smartphone right now, right? So I think it's really giving colleagues the confidence that they can be storytellers as well, and we will be there to help them as well. So I think as a result of that, we've had quite a bit of success with user generated content, and it's a happy problem where I actually have to line up stories to be published on our internet actually. Yeah, because I think I think also teams or colleagues, when they see their stories are being put up on the global internet, there's the celebration of success as well. So and it gives appreciation to colleagues to say, hey, so and so is doing this story, it's wonderful, let's celebrate and let's give out some rewards and recognition. So it all ties into making the organization that place where colleagues enjoy working at and they bring their best to work actually. Yeah.
So true. So very true. So
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about human resources, HR,
Mm,
employee
mm,
relations within companies,
mm,
because oftentimes that type of work, the internal communications, is done together as a partner
mm.
with human resources.
Yeah.
This is probably my bias a bit more because I've worked in another sector, more the nonprofit
Mm,
NGO sector, and it always seemed to me that HR, I don't want to say tunnel vision, but they would often come and say, okay, we need your budget, we need your staff, and we need the strategic goals for communications to enable employee engagement initiatives. And in describing that and enabling the external work to incorporate the two, as you talked about, sometimes
mm,
becomes a tug of war in
mm,
terms of the importance of the customer and stakeholder to the brand vis-a-vis the
mm,
employee ambassadors, so to speak.
mm,
So
mm,
you gave some excellent examples. So what advice do you have for those in communication roles who may be struggling with this a little bit in
mm,
terms of how to make your HR team a bit more strategic in the
mm.
way they look at internal communications or internal promotions?
Well, I mean, the thing is for me, I think mine was quite unique in the sense that when I was at Wiley, I reported into HR, like twice right now. Yeah. So, I think, this is quite a unique thing because a few people that I spoke to, they were quite amazed actually, because usually they think that communications will stand alone on its own or you'll report into marketing. So, I still are having a very, very good experience with HR, because I think when I reported into HR, like what I'm doing now, is really understanding the strategic trust that the organization is going through and really working with them as partners and collaborators on how to drive messaging. Because I think some of my HR colleagues, I mean, they realize that they're quite task oriented. Like, I want to do A, B, C, D, E, but the intent is good, but sometimes the messaging doesn't come out quite right. And I think that's where communicators like myself come in to actually look at messaging. Oh, how do you wordsmith this? And by writing this, what are some of the potential questions that some people may have? And I think so far across my two jobs, it's been a wonderful partnership actually. Coming back to your question, I think it's really taking the time to understand your partners. What are their priorities? What are their challenges? How can you help them? And I think having those regular meetings and conversations helped as well. In my previous place, the combined teams of comms and HR will meet at least once a month, and we also have lunch and learns as well. So I think it's the overall atmosphere of collaboration and partnership that has been very, very important, and which has actually helped communications to succeed as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. That is fascinating. My mouth dropped too because I had never heard of communications reporting to
Right?
HR. Usually it's the opposite
Yeah.
direction because you'll have a
Yeah.
CMO, chief marketing officer, a chief communications officer, but you
Mm,
might have the chief people officer maybe there as well, but usually
mm,
share the same seat at the table, so to speak. So that's really
mm,
interesting to see that model and how well it's working for you in the
mm,
company
mm,
also.
mm,
I guess my next question would be for those communicators out there, What advice would you have on internal and change communication in terms of any cautionary tales? Like when I go back to the 3-year restructuring, and I think
Mm,
always everything's a learning experience. There's always
yeah.
something you would change. Is there anything you say, okay, red flag, hang on here.
Mm.
There's one thing you should always be aware of, or any story you like to share
Mm.
with the audience?
Yeah, I think, especially when you work in a global company and in a matrixed environment, it's easy to forget people relationships. For example, if when we let go a person in the organization, initially we thought only about the reporting line and teams, and we realized that we had forgotten that the person had relationships in other parts of the world. And this is especially important when they've been with the organization a long time, and suddenly the person was gone. So we had feedback that, oh, I tried to email Mary and then I realized that I had bounced back and I didn't realize that she's left. So we took that as a learning lesson, and we realized that actually people value relationships a lot. So every 2 weeks we sent out a mass email, and we put up on our intranet as well, subject to the approval of the affected colleague as well as the line manager, to say, do you want us to announce that you have left? So that went down very well actually. And we also gave a summary of changes, because it's not just redundancies. Teams were restructured, they took on new roles and all that. So we gave a summary that went out to all colleagues, all 5,000 colleagues around the world. So it helped people be in the know about what's happening maybe in another part of the world, and whether it will affect them as well. I think that is something that we learned, and I think in communications, um, it's important to show empathy, especially during very difficult times. Sometimes you may not have all the answers, but I think that respect and empathy is very, very important actually. At Wiley, there was this old saying, we are human beings first and professionals second, and I think that has stayed on with many, many colleagues actually, and that's how we aspired to be when we were doing all this restructuring. And I think the colleagues who felt that we did do a good job. So that was very assuring for us as communications, because it was the first time that we were doing it. Of course there were lessons learned along the way, and sometimes it's a bit of really being very ginger with communications, but overall I think we handled it as much as possible, to be humane, to show respect to affected colleagues, and even to the teams that um, remained as well. So I think that is the overall atmosphere of professional conduct, actually. Yeah.
And
I think,
go ahead, sorry. Go ahead, sorry.
also the thing is, also be aware of geographical nuances, because a lot of us work in international organizations with different cultures, and some cultures may be more expressive than others. So I think it's important for that's where I think the partnership with HR is very important, to really see how our colleagues feeling, on the ground sentiment, whether there's any need to do further communications. I think sometimes people rely on just sending out a memo and said we have communicated, but it shouldn't be that case. I think it boils down to basic decency, right? To really talk to people, to just understand how are they feeling, and even if they don't want to talk, I know that at least show care. Yeah, yeah.
That's an excellent point. Basic decency. It's important to see how
Mm,
people are
mm,
feeling. And like you said,
mm.
communication isn't just a memo one way. You have to find out,
Yeah,
receive the
yeah,
response as well to understand what's
yeah,
happening. Now, I
yeah.
know leaders are often, particularly new CEOs coming into organizations, or sometime hired, or part of their remit from the board of
Mm,
directors is to implement a change program at some
yeah,
point to accompany a
yeah.
new strategy or a new branding. What advice would
Mm,
you have for CEOs who are about to embark on a change management program? in terms of, I love the last answer you gave, but is there any special advice you would give to leaders or CEOs who are listening, who are either in the midst of it or about to implement a change management program, given the times we are in this year in 2020?
I think, it's really understanding the culture of the organization, because, every organization has its own nuances, its own speak or behaviors and all that. And I think, understanding that is important. And, and working very closely with HR and the Chief Communications Officer, to really know how to best implement it. I'm sure, even before they came on board, they would have been briefed during the interview process, or this is what we're doing, we want you to implement this. But I think it will be very, very useful for the incoming CEO or leader to really understand what the organization is like, beyond like we have 5,000 employees in 14 locations, but really, what is the heart and soul of the organization, and how should you carry out your communications as such. I mean, of course, there's always that face-to-face, element that we should never miss out, actually, because I think the tendency is everything goes on online and digital and all that. But I think, great communications is not having that one or nothing, but it's really using a blend of channels and tools to really reach out to your to your audiences, actually. Yeah. So my advice is to really understand the culture of the organization, what is the heartbeat, and before you implement the change, actually. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to add or leave our audiences with today on change communication or communications in general, or Singapore?
I think, well, if you come to Singapore, I mean, some of my other colleagues, expatriate colleagues, have said, be prepared to put on 6 pounds because the food here is really good. Yeah, but I think overall communications, it is a very interesting field to be in, and I've been in it for quite some time, and there's always something to learn, right? I mean, for us right now, we talk about change communications, we talk about using data analytics. There's never a dull moment, I would say. And I think as communicators, it's important to have that open mind, and also, one of my mentors told me to be a sponge, to absorb as much as possible, to really learn what's happening. And I think also, for me personally, I try not to think of myself as just a communications person. I read widely. I read on leadership. I read on HR trends. I read geeky stuff. I think the spirit of learning and curiosity is very, very important, actually. And I think that's what keeps the job interesting. Yeah. So I would say, for people who want to do communications, is having an open mind, learning, being curious, and I think a sense of humor helps, especially when things just land on you, and like, okay, this has happened, so what should we do, and the sort of stuff. And I think also don't be afraid to ask for help. I think this is true across all, not just communications, actually, because we live in a world where things are changing so fast, and we'll never have perfect knowledge of a situation or something. So I think it's really understanding as much as possible, and not being afraid to ask, actually. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And in terms of learning and reading, Eleanor is very active on LinkedIn. I've seen your articles. Her articles trend on LinkedIn, so I encourage you to follow Eleanor Tan on LinkedIn. She's very entertaining. She's got a lot going on, and she shares lots of her knowledge, especially for communicators starting out. Highly recommend. Well, thank you so much, Eleanor. It's been a thrill to speak with you today. Thank you for all this amazing insight and knowledge that you shared with our audience.
Thank you. Keep safe, everyone.